Megan Brooks no longer believed in easy, fresh starts. At 44, her life was made of silent routines and careful decisions, as if every step needed to be calculated, so as not to wake something she struggled so hard to keep buried. That night, all she wanted was to go home after an exhausting day at the clinic. But as soon as she entered the nearly empty parking lot, she felt it again. That pit in her stomach. That sensation of being watched. She tried to ignore it, quickening her pace while fumbling for her keys and her purse. The sound of footsteps behind her confirmed what her mind was already screaming. When she turned around, he was there. Daniel. Standing just a few meters away, with the same look she knew all too well. It wasn't a surprise, it was inevitable. Did you think you could just disappear? His voice came low, heavy with suppressed rage. Megan instinctively backed away, her heart racing. There was no one around. No easy exit. Only the echo of her own steps and her breath growing shorter and shorter. "Stay away from me," she managed to say, even with her voice trembling. He laughed, moving forward. "You still don't get it, do you?" When he grabbed her arm with force, everything rushed back at once. The fear, the helplessness, the suffocating feeling of having nowhere to run. Megan tried to break free, struggling, but he was stronger. The grip tightened, pulling her back into something she swore she would never live through again. And then another presence. A rapid, precise movement. Daniel's hand was ripped from hers as if it were nothing. Megan stumbled back, breathless, while an unknown man placed himself between them. Tall, impeccable, completely calm, as if that situation was just a detail. "Let her go," he said in a low tone, yet impossible to ignore. Daniel tried to react, but he didn't stand a chance. In seconds he was on the ground, out of breath, out of control. The silence that followed was heavy, almost surreal. Megan stood still, confused, looking at the man in front of her. He didn't seem surprised or scared, just in control. As if he had already decided what would happen there long before he arrived. "You are safe now," he said, finally looking at her. And for the first time in a long time she almost believed it. But Megan still had no idea who he was, and much less the type of world she had just entered. If you think this was intense, wait until you find out what this man is truly capable of. Leave your like, subscribe, and come with me because what's coming next will change everything. Megan could still feel her arm throbbing where she had been held, but the shock was greater than the pain. The man in front of her showed no haste or concern, merely observing Daniel on the ground as if evaluating a problem already solved. There was something in his posture, firm, controlled, that made it impossible to question his authority. "Leave," he said, without raising his voice. Daniel hesitated, but the look he received in response was enough. Without saying another word, he struggled to his feet and retreated, disappearing into the darkness of the parking lot. The silence that remained felt heavier than the confrontation. Megan took a deep breath, trying to regain control. "I thank you," she said, still unable to organize her thoughts. "You didn't have to." "I did," he interrupted simply, as if it were obvious. That made her pause. It wasn't kindness. It wasn't casual. It was a decision. He stepped just close enough for her to notice the calculated care in every movement. "He won't stop," he continued. "People like that don't stop on their own." Megan's heart tightened. She knew that was true, but hearing it out loud made it more real, more urgent. "I have a restraining order," she replied almost automatically. He tilted his head slightly, as if that carried no weight at all. "That doesn't stop anyone." For a moment Megan thought about leaving, getting back in the car, driving home, and pretending none of that had happened. But something kept her there. Maybe it was the fear. Maybe it was the strange, unexpected feeling that this man saw the situation with a clarity she no longer possessed. "Who are you?" she finally asked. He watched her for a second longer than necessary. "Someone who can prevent this from happening again." The answer should have frightened her. And it did. But at the same time there was something in her that was tired of running, of living in anticipation of the next attack. A black car approached silently, stopping near them. Megan hadn't heard it before. It made her realize how much everything there seemed coordinated. "Come," he said, opening the rear door. "I'm taking you somewhere safe." Megan looked at the empty parking lot, at the path that would lead her back to the same routine of fear, and then at him. It was a choice. Stay in the world she knew, or enter something completely different, unknown, and possibly much more dangerous. After a second that felt longer than it should have, she got into the car. The interior of the car was silent, far too sophisticated to seem casual. Megan sat rigid in her seat, her hands still trembling slightly, as the door closed with a soft thud, almost isolating the world outside. As the vehicle began to move, she noticed something strange. There was no conversation, no questions. Only absolute control of the situation. She looked around discreetly. The driver didn't say a word. The tinted windows hid everything outside, and the man beside her, Jun-suk, seemed completely at ease, as if this were routine. "Where are we going?" Megan asked, breaking the silence. "To a place where he can't get to you," he replied without hesitation. The answer was simple but loaded with something greater. Megan swallowed hard. "You speak as if you're certain of that." He turned his face slowly to face her. "I am." There was something in that look that made her believe him, even without understanding why. It wasn't just confidence. It was power. The car left the busier streets and entered a quieter area, where lights were scarcer and the houses larger, further apart from one another. Finally, they stopped before a high gate, which opened automatically before the car even fully slowed down. This wasn't just a house. It was a fortress. Megan felt her heart tighten. This wasn't normal. None of this was normal. "Do you live here?" she asked, almost in a whisper. "I control this place," he replied. "Would you like me to translate the next part where she enters the house?" The difference between the words did not go unnoticed. When the car stopped, someone was already waiting outside, opening the door for them. Megan hesitated for a second before getting out, observing the surroundings. Everything seemed impeccable but also vigilant, as if every detail were there for a reason. "You are safe here," said Jun-suk, stepping out beside her. Megan crossed her arms, trying to shield herself from that growing sensation of entering something much bigger than she imagined. "And what is the price of this?" He watched her for a moment, as if evaluating the question. "Security always has a price," he finally answered. "But you don't have to pay anything yet." That did not reassure her. As she was led inside, Megan realized she wasn't just being protected. She was being taken into a new world. A world where rules were different, where people like Jun-suk decided what happened, and where it might not be as easy to leave as it was to enter. "Would you like me to translate the next section where she explores the interior of the house?" The interior of the car was silent, far too sophisticated to seem casual. Megan sat rigid in her seat, her hands still trembling slightly, as the door closed with a soft thud, almost isolating the world outside. As the vehicle began to move, she noticed something strange. There was no conversation, no questions. Only absolute control of the situation. She looked around discreetly. The driver didn't say a word. The tinted windows hid everything outside, and the man beside her, Jun-suk, seemed completely at ease, as if this were routine. "Where are we going?" Megan asked, breaking the silence. "To a place where he can't get to you," he replied without hesitation. The answer was simple but loaded with something greater. Megan swallowed hard. "You speak as if you're certain of that." He turned his face slowly to face her. "I am." There was something in that look that made her believe him, even without understanding why. It wasn't just confidence. It was power. The car left the busier streets and entered a quieter area, where lights were scarcer and the houses larger, further apart from one another. Finally, they stopped before a high gate, which opened automatically before the car even fully slowed down. This wasn't just a house. It was a fortress. Megan felt her heart tighten. This wasn't normal. None of this was normal. "Do you live here?" she asked, almost in a whisper. "I control this place," he replied. "Would you like me to translate the next part where she enters the house?" The difference between the words did not go unnoticed. When the car stopped, someone was already waiting outside, opening the door for them. Megan hesitated for a second before getting out, observing the surroundings. Everything seemed impeccable but also vigilant, as if every detail were there for a reason. "You are safe here," said Jun-suk, stepping out beside her. Megan crossed her arms, trying to shield herself from that growing sensation of entering something much bigger than she imagined. "And what is the price of this?" He watched her for a moment, as if evaluating the question. Security always has a price, he finally answered. But you don't have to pay anything yet. That did not reassure her. As she was led inside, Megan realized she wasn't just being protected. She was being taken into a new world. A world where rules were different, where people like Jun-suk decided what happened, and where it might not be as easy to leave as it was to enter. Would you like me to translate the next section where she explores the interior of the house? The following morning, Megan woke up even before anyone came to call for her. For a few seconds she lay still in bed, staring at the ceiling trying to figure out where she was. Then it all came back at once. The parking lot, Daniel, the man who had appeared out of nowhere, and the place where she had decided to stay. She got up slowly, still cautious, as if the environment might react to any unexpected movement. Upon leaving the room, she encountered the same controlled silence as the day before. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing seemed improvised. "He is waiting for you," a female voice said from behind. Megan turned to see an elegant woman gesturing the way with a discreet motion. Without argument, she followed. The office was spacious, with large windows and a view that made it clear just how isolated the place was. Jun-suk was standing with his back to her, watching the outside as if he had all the time in the world. "You stayed," he said without turning around. Megan crossed her arms, leaning on her own resolve to avoid showing any insecurity. "I said I wanted answers." He turned slowly, his gaze direct and attentive. "And you will have them. But first, you need to understand where you are." She frowned, suspicious. "Then explain." "You came in here, you are no longer alone," he replied. That should have reassured her. Instead, it brought a different sensation. Something deeper. More serious. "I didn't ask for this," she countered. "No," he agreed, unfazed. "But you accepted it." The words hung in the air heavy. Megan knew he was right. And that bothered her more than anything else. Even so, something inside her was beginning to give way. Not entirely. Not yet. But for the first time in a long while, she wasn't thinking about running. She was trying to understand. And that, in itself, was already a change. The following days passed with a strange stability. Megan began to notice there was a routine to the place. Not chaotic or unpredictable, but precise. Everything functioned with an almost silent efficiency, as if every person knew exactly what to do without needing to be told. First, she kept her distance. She observed more than she participated. She walked the hallways with caution, always alert, as if still waiting for something to spiral out of control. But nothing did. Jun-suk would appear at specific moments, never by chance. Sometimes during breakfast, other times at the end of the day. Always calm, always attentive. He didn't pressure her, nor did he ask invasive questions, but he never seemed truly absent either. "You don't need to stay locked in that room," he said one morning, finding her in the living area. Megan crossed her arms, defensive by instinct. "I'm not locked in." He tilted his head slightly, as if accepting the answer but not entirely convinced. "Then start acting like someone who isn't." That irritated her, but it also made sense. Gradually, Megan began to move around more. She explored the space, spoke briefly with some of the staff, and noticed how everyone there respected Jun-suk without question. It wasn't obvious fear. It was something more complex. Loyalty, perhaps. One afternoon, she found him in the outer garden, one of the few places where the atmosphere seemed less rigid. He was alone, observing the space in silence. "You always have someone nearby," she commented, approaching. "But you never seem to need it." He glanced at her from the side, almost imperceptibly. Needing and having are different things. Megan remained silent for a moment, absorbing that. "And you?" he asked then. "Are you still waiting for the moment to leave?" The question caught her off guard. She could have said yes. She could have kept her distance. But she didn't. "I'm still trying to figure out if I should," she replied honestly. Jun-suk nodded, as if that answer were enough. That's already a start. Something was shifting between them. It wasn't fast, nor was it obvious, but it was there. Megan was starting to trust. And Jun-suk was starting to care. The sense of security began to feel familiar, almost dangerous. Megan no longer checked every door twice before going to sleep, nor did she jump at every distant sound in the hallways. For the first time in a long while, her body seemed to relax. But peace never came without a price, and she was about to find that out. That morning everything seemed normal. Until it wasn't. She went down for breakfast and noticed the change immediately. The environment was still silent, but there was something different in the air. More tense. More alert. Two men who weren't usually there now occupied strategic positions, discreetly watching every movement. Megan stopped in her tracks, her instincts rushing back. What's going on? No one answered. That was when Jun-suk appeared. His gaze already colder than usual. There was no hesitation in his steps. There was no room for doubt. Go back to your room, he said directly. Megan frowned. No. You need to tell me what. Now, he interrupted firm. That made her freeze. It wasn't the tone he used with her. It was different, harder, more dangerous. She hesitated for a second too long, but she obeyed. Minutes later, back in her room, Megan began to realize that something was truly wrong. Quick movements outside. Low voices. Doors being opened and closed with controlled urgency. Then came the knock. Short. Precise. When she opened it, she found Kim Tae-hyun standing outside. You need to come with me, he said. What's going on? Megan insisted, her heart racing. He didn't answer immediately. He just glanced around before speaking in a low voice. Someone is testing the limits. Her stomach sank. Daniel. Taehyun hesitated for a brief second. Not just him. That was worse. Megan felt the weight of reality crash down on her all at once. It wasn't just the past following her. It was the world she had entered. And for the first time since arriving there, she realized something with absolute clarity. The security Jun-suk offered didn't come from nothing. It existed because there were people out there willing to break it. Megan was led through corridors she didn't know yet. Deeper inside, more restricted. The silence was no longer comfortable. It was tense, heavy. Every step echoed like a reminder that something was out of control. Where are we going? She asked, trying to keep up with Taehyun's steady pace. A safer place, he replied without looking back. That didn't help. When they reached a smaller, windowless room, he opened the door and motioned for her to enter. Stay here until we receive instructions. Instructions from whom? Megan insisted, already feeling the anxiety tighten her chest. He finally faced her. From him. The door closed. Alone again, Megan began to pace back and forth. The control she thought she was regaining was slipping away fast. This was no longer just about Daniel. It was bigger. Much bigger. Minutes felt like hours. Until the door opened again. Jun-suk walked in. But he wasn't the same man she had been getting to know. There was something different about his presence now, harder, more distant. As if a layer had been removed. You are safe here, he said, getting straight to the point. Megan took a step forward. I want to know what's going on. Now. He watched her for a moment, evaluating. They are testing my reaction. Who is they? People who believe you are a weakness. The words hit harder than she expected. I'm not your problem, she shot back, almost defensively. No, he said firmly. You became my responsibility. That made her stop. It wasn't exactly what she wanted to hear. But it wasn't something she could ignore either. And what does that mean? Megan asked, her voice lower. Jun-suk stepped closer. It means that by coming for you, they are coming for me. His gaze left no room for doubt. This wasn't theory. It was reality. And are you going to let that happen? For a brief second, silence took over. Then he answered. No. Simple. Direct. Definitive. Megan felt a shiver run through her body. Not out of fear, but out of understanding. She wasn't just being protected anymore. She was at the center of something that could explode at any moment. The silence following his response was heavier than any explanation. Megan felt the air grow thick, as if in that moment there was no more room for doubt or denial. This was real, and she was right in the middle of it. So that's it, she said, her voice firmer than she felt. I stay hidden while you handle everything out there? Jun-suk watched her closely, as if weighing every word before responding. You stay safe while I do what needs to be done. It's not the same thing, Megan shot back, taking a step forward. I've lived like this before. Trapped depending on someone else to decide what's best for me. I'm not going back to that. The words came out more intense than she expected, but they were true. It was more than fear, it was memory. For a moment, something shifted in his expression. Not irritation but recognition. This isn't control, he said, his voice lower. It's protection. Megan shook her head. To you it might be. To me, it's starting to feel the same. The silence between the two of them stretched out. This time it was different. More personal. Jun-suk took a deep breath, quickly running a hand over his face as if adjusting something internally. If you leave here now, you become vulnerable. And that's exactly what they want. And if I stay, what do I become? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. And that was what made Megan understand. She wasn't just someone being protected. She was part of the game now. I didn't choose this, she said, softer but firm. I know, he replied. But now you need to choose what you're going to do with it. The words hung in the air. There was no going back to how things were before. There was no more pretending this didn't involve her. Megan closed her eyes for a brief second, settling everything inside her. The fear was still there. But it wasn't the only feeling anymore. When she opened her eyes again, something was different. More determined. Then I'm not going to hide, she said, looking him directly in the eye. If this involves me, I want to know everything. I want to understand. And I want to be prepared. Jun-suk watched her in silence. And for the first time he didn't try to stop her. The shift was immediate. After Megan's decision, there was no more room to keep her on the sidelines. Jun-suk didn't try to convince her otherwise. He simply adjusted how he handled the situation. And that, in itself, said everything. That night, the atmosphere in the house was different. Quieter but also more tense. It wasn't visible preparation, it was anticipation. Megan was in the living area when Jun-suk entered. His posture completely transformed. There was no more softness. Only focus. They've moved, he said bluntly. Her heart raced but she didn't back down. Where? Too close. Before she could ask more, Taehyun appeared by the door. They're already in position. Megan felt the weight of it. This was no longer a distant threat. It was happening. You stay here, Jun-suk said, looking at her. No, Megan replied firm. I said I wasn't going to hide. For a second his gaze hardened. But this time he didn't push back. Then stay behind me. And don't do anything I don't authorize. She nodded. It was the most control he was willing to cede, and she knew it. Minutes later the sound came. First distant. Then closer. Gates being forced. Voices. Footsteps. Megan felt her body react automatically, adrenaline taking over. But unlike before, she wasn't alone. When the first men appeared, everything happened fast. Jun-suk moved without hesitation. Precise. Controlled. Every action calculated. There was no uncontrolled rage. There was intent. Taehyun and the others were already in position, neutralizing every advance with brutal efficiency. Megan stepped back a few paces, watching it all, her heart hammering in her chest. It was real. Violent. But also organized. Then she saw him. Daniel. Among the intruders, more desperate than ever, looking directly at her. This doesn't end like this, he shouted, lunging forward. But he didn't get far. Jun-suk intercepted him first. The impact was blunt. Decisive. Daniel fell without a chance to react. The silence that followed was almost immediate. As if everything had been resolved the instant it began. Megan stood still, unable to move for a second. Jun-suk turned to her, his breathing still controlled, as if this were just another executed decision. It's over, he said. And this time it felt like the truth. The silence that took over after the confrontation was unlike anything Megan had ever felt. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the end of it. She was still standing there trying to process what had just happened, while everything around them slowly returned to control. The men were backing off, organizing the space, as if it were just another completed operation. But for her it wasn't just another one. It was everything. Megan began, her voice faltering slightly. Jun-suk took a step toward her, now without the same rigidity as before. He won't be coming back. The words were simple, but carried a definitive weight. "How can you be sure?" she asked almost in a whisper. He looked at her for a moment. "Because I saw to it." And this time Megan didn't question him. She looked at the spot where Daniel had fallen minutes earlier. There was no more anger. No fear. Only emptiness. As if a part of her life had finally been closed. Her knees buckled slightly, and before she could react, Jun-suk was already by her side, holding her firmly. "It's over," he repeated more softly. Megan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years beginning to dissolve. For the first time there was no expectation that he would return. There was no longer that constant alert inside her. She was free. Her eyes filled with tears, but they weren't from despair. They were from relief. Without thinking, she stepped closer and gripped his shirt tightly, as if she needed to confirm this was real. Jun-suk didn't pull away. Instead, he wrapped his arms around her carefully, yet firm enough for her to feel she no longer had to hold herself up alone. "You don't have to run anymore," he said close to her. And that sentence broke what remained of her resistance. Megan closed her eyes, finally letting it all fall away. The fear, the tension, the years of constant survival. When she pulled back, her eyes still damp, there was something new in her expression. Not fragility but peace. "You kept your promise," she said. He watched her in silence for a moment. "I always do." And for the first time it didn't sound like a warning. Sounded like safety. The days that followed were silent. But not in an empty way. In a quiet, stable way. For the first time in years, Megan woke up without that weight in her chest. Without the need to check her surroundings. Without the constant instinct to flee. The house remained the same with its precise and controlled routine, but now she saw it differently. Not as a strange place, but as a space where she could finally exist without fear. She began to occupy the rooms more, leaving her bedroom without hesitation, walking without haste. Small gestures that before seemed impossible. Jun-suk remained present, not invasive, not controlling, just there. Solid. Constant. Like someone who didn't need to prove anything because he had already done enough. On a quiet afternoon, Megan found him again in the garden. The same place where, days ago, she was still questioning everything. "It feels different now," she commented, looking around. "What does?" he asked. She thought for a second. "I do." He watched her in silence as if he already knew. "You're no longer reacting," he said. "You're choosing." Megan nodded slightly, and for the first time there was no doubt in that choice. She took a step closer without hesitation. "I stayed because of the safety, but that's not the only thing keeping me here." His gaze shifted, more intent. "I know," he replied in a low voice. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of meaning. Megan took a deep breath, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time: stability. Not the fragile kind that could break at any moment, but something firm, something built. "I don't want to run anymore," she said. "From anything." Jun-suk stepped closer, closing the distance between them naturally. "Then you don't have to." This time when he held her face there was no tension. Only resolve. The kiss came calmly but definitively. It wasn't impulse. It was choice. And in that moment Megan understood. Her life was no longer about surviving. It was about staying. For the first time she was exactly where she wanted to be. Tell me something honestly. Do you also feel angry when you see stories of abusive relationships? Have you ever wished people like that would truly pay for what they've done? Tell me in the comments, I want to know what you think. Leave a like and subscribe for more intense stories like this one.